What if I told you we could stop these school attacks? There's data and research that shows us how. There are programs that are making it happen, and there are bold people and organizations that are making it happen now. And that's what we're working with. We're working with a number of organizations at both the state and local level in moving upstream. How do we stop these from happening in the first place? Would like to start by saying howdy. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. My name is John Michael Keyes. I'm the Executive Director of the I Love You Guys Foundation. And to get things started, I want to go through just a little bit of history on why I am here today. On September 27th, 2006, a stranger entered, Platte Canyon High School and held 7 girls hostage. He fired a round into the classroom wall. He claimed to have enough explosives to level the building. Over the course of the afternoon, my daughter Emily, who was one of those hostages, texted both me and my wife Ellen a text message that said, "I love you guys." There was no communication with our stranger. Negotiations primarily went through Emily. And the threat of explosives, the lack of communication, the decision was made to intervene. And at 3:36 p.m., Jefferson County Regional SWAT breached that classroom door. They breached a hole in the classroom wall. They got 6 guys into that classroom. But that stranger shot Emily, and as he brought the weapon to himself, Jeffco Regional SWAT shot him. Based on that, my wife and I started the I Love You Guys Foundation. And within 4 days, we wrote this mission statement. It's 13 years, folks. 13 years, and that's still the mission of the I Love You Guys Foundation. Now, initially, the foundation worked with other organizations in support of that mission. And it wasn't until 2009 when we started diving deep into school safety. And if you had done a Google search in 2009, 141 million hits. And clearly we're not experts. I know, thank you, flattering photo, correct? But we're not strangers to it. Ellen had been volunteering at the school since the kids were in 3rd grade. In fact, in 2005, she was on the District Accountability Council. She missed a meeting, they elected her chair. And so we did have a handle on it. But we started diving into it. And one of the things we bumped into was this. FEMA had released a memo in 2006, and again in 2009, and again in 2012 on how important it was to use plain language in a crisis. And here's the core concept in that memo. So we started looking at it. What is that lexicon, the vocabulary associated with school safety? And it was crazy. What we found was all over the map. You see, if you ask somebody what the 3 greatest challenges in their last crisis was, often they'll say communication, communication, communication. And yet schools were still using codes or response levels. So we looked at it. What is the plain language associated with crisis response? And we looked at the federal level, we looked at the state level, but it was really a number of school districts across the country that were using very specific language. One of those school districts was close to home. It was Adams County, Adams 12 5-star schools. And they had created a curriculum that they could bring into the classroom, show the same material to both students and staff and parents if they wanted, on what to do in a crisis. Now, they called this the Response Action Matrix, RAM. But Ellen and I have a little background in communication, and we looked at it. Who's our audience? Law enforcement and educators. Law enforcement, well, they're paramilitary. Sergeant says something, the officer says, "Yes, ma'am." Who is the least paramilitary demographic in our communities? Educators, right? The principal says something, teacher says why, and we're certainly not going to ram this down their throat. So we took the core concept and we relabeled it. We called it the Standard Response Protocol. And if we look at their continuum, we took these actions, lock out, lock down, evacuate, and shelter. And those 4 actions were the original 4 actions of the SRP. Now, we introduced this in 2009, and it began gaining traction. And organizationally, the I Love You Guys Foundation made a commitment. And the commitment is to constantly evaluate and evolve these materials. So in 2015, we released version 2. We updated the graphics, we expanded our audiences, and I'm going to give you Cliff Note training today on the Standard Response Protocol. Each action is followed by a directive, and every action has some specific instructions. When we announce it, we're going to repeat it. The first time gets everybody's attention, that second time clarifies the action in the directive. So, lockout, get inside, lock outside doors, lockout, get inside, lock outside doors. Why are we doing this? There's something dangerous outside the building. What are we going to do? We're going to bring everybody inside, and as much as possible, let's do business as usual. Just because the 7-Eleven is getting robbed doesn't mean that we need to shut down what's happening in our school. Now, lockdown's more serious. Lockdown locks lights out of sight. Lockdown locks lights out of sight. There's something dangerous inside the building. What we want to introduce here is the notion of a time barrier. And it turns out that a locked classroom door is a proven time barrier. DOJ and FBI tell us that these active killer events are typically over within 5 minutes, 70% of the time. 90% are over in 10. The Sandy Hook Commission, they released their report in 2015. Their number one environmental design recommendation was the ability to lock the classroom door from inside the classroom by not just teachers, but substitute teachers as well. In their report, they said the reason they made that the number one recommendation is that through testimony and research, they found 0 cases of a gunman breaching a locked classroom door. I'm going to pause there. Now, the testimony that they had, we wanted to look at a little differently. And so the foundation did some research, and we shifted the question. Have we lost anybody who was behind a locked classroom door? We heard it already this morning in Parkland. Okay, our perpetrator there did not gain entry into any locked classrooms, but did fire upon students and staff that could be seen through that corridor window. Red Lake, Minnesota, our perpetrator there actually shot the lock and did not defeat it, but gained entry into the classroom through that side panel window. The only other time we lost somebody who was behind a locked classroom door, the stranger was already in the classroom at Platte Canyon High School, and it took 1,100 grains of explosives to breach that classroom door. So here's what we know. That locked classroom door is a proven time barrier. So locks, lights, out of sight. But we don't end the conversation there. We also talk about evacuation. Sometimes we need to just leave the building. But also, we want to provide the option of self-evacuation, that if you think it's safer to get out of the building, you have permission to do so. And that isn't simply students, it's staff as well. We do encourage staff, if they self-evacuate, bring your students. And we add one more conversation, and that is a police-led evacuation. In the aftermath, sometimes these evacuations are traumatic for the students. Well, let's do some stress inoculation. Let's tell our students what to expect. And similarly, the foundation's work with law enforcement, we're also working with law enforcement on emotional responsibility in releasing that lockdown. Shelter, we've heard shelter in place. In fact, we got on the FEMA website 17 different conditions where they said shelter in place. 2 of the most common were for hazmat or tornado. If I heard shelter in place and I'm duct taping plastic to the door, it's a tornado coming down the alley, that's a bad day. So what we do is get specific, state the hazard and the safety strategy. And in our materials, we include some samples. This one was interesting. When we first released the standard response protocol, I got a call from the Pacific Northwest, said tsunami isn't on your list. And I said, oh man, I live in Colorado. I've got this high ground aced, all right? But really what we do is talk to our schools about customizing the materials for whatever's in their neck of the woods. Now, since 2015, we've also included bonus training. And that bonus training was one more action. And that action is hold in your classroom, hold in your classroom. Why? Sometimes we need to keep the hallways clear, even if the bell rings. Well, we began receiving requests for materials with all 5 actions. And so in 2018, schools had a choice, the SRP or the SRP extended. Today, for 2020, we've incorporated that 5th action into the standard response protocol. Now, how do folks use it? A wise woman said this. You've got to want it, own it, and do it. And here's how. Our DIY is download it yourself. All of the materials are available on the website at no cost. And when I say no cost, there aren't any forms to fill out. You don't have to pay us with your email address. You can just go to this website, look at the materials, and download them. We start with version 2. What did we change? Pre-K to second grade materials, and this was great. We worked with Berks County, Pennsylvania. They've got the child psychologists, they've got the experts, and they provided us with a curriculum, all right? Shared it with us. How do we give that kindergarten teacher age-appropriate tactics for talking to our little ones? K-12 operational guidance. If it works in K-12, maybe it'll work in higher ed. So we started with community colleges. And with our adult audiences during a lockdown, we add one more instruction, and that is prepare to evade or defend. If it works for adults in higher ed, maybe it'll work in business and institution. But it's really important. You see, we can have these conversations, we can start the conversations age appropriate. We recognized another void, and the void is in reunification. After any type of crisis, not simply an active violence event, but even a power outage or a hazmat incident, how do we bring our students back together with their parents with accountability? In 2012, again, based on materials that districts were using, we introduced the standard response protocol, standard reunification method. We updated the standard reunification method in 2016, and all of the materials are online at no cost. And it isn't simply the how-to, it's also the tools to do it. The reunification operation kit, we include the ability to take this into the field using binders. Here's our checklists. We've got job action sheets inside, and we've got lanyards and role IDs. We've got additional materials in that go box, caution tape, reunification cards, pens, etc. Now, if I was a smarter executive director of a small nonprofit in Colorado, I would be selling these by the dozens. But we don't sell them. We have a philosophy. You see, if you buy it, it gathers dust. If you build it, it gathers fingerprints. If you just bought it, you buy it, we ship it, you put it on your shelf, and check, we're done. But if you build it yourself, we're humans, we're tool builders. We want to do something with it next. And so online, again at no cost, we've got the files for you to print out. Included in the files is a manifest, and the manifest is the assembly instructions. We also have the role IDs, fronts and backs, other things to kind of finish off the kit, binder spines, org charts. We also include instructions on the job training so that you can provide that to folks as you're recruiting them during the reunification. All of it is online at no cost. Now, our first presentation on the standard response protocol was in April of 2009. In kind of a weird sequence of events, the DOJ invited Ellen and I to a national safety conference and present this in Orlando, Florida. We also started a conversation with Jefferson County School District about piloting the standard response protocol in a half a dozen schools. Well, in September, John McDonald, the security director at Jeffco, called me and said, we're not going to pilot this. We're just going to roll it out in all 150 plus schools. By the end of that school year, we had 250 schools in Colorado and dozens more across the country. Since then, today in Colorado, we've got 1,500 of the 1,800 and change schools using this program. That's 82%. Around the country, you heard a number this morning, it's 25,000. Our latest estimate is now 30,000 schools, districts, and agencies are using our programs across the US and Canada. And it doesn't end there. Department of Defense, Education Authority, there are 11 other countries where the SRP is being used. Our guesstimate is about 18 million kids, almost 700,000 teachers, and 65,000 cops are being impacted every school year by our programs. And there's more. There are thousands of businesses, organizations, other faith-based organizations using these materials. Our annual budget was $520,000 in 2018, about $700,000 in 2019, and that includes a budgetary reserve. How did we get there? By going out and talking about it. Last year, the foundation did 160 direct trainings, thousands of indirect trainings using our materials. To give you an idea of what my schedule looks like, That's the last 34 days of travel. That doesn't include a trip to Afton, Wyoming, Lincoln, Nebraska, or a missed flight in Madison that made me drive to Tiffin, Ohio for a presentation, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Painted Post, and catch that flight out of Syracuse. It's a crazy calendar, isn't it? All right, let's talk about training. One of the things we include in our training is drill training. And I've been hearing it since you guys have been started talking, and I want to be very specific. I want to separate the notion of a drill from an exercise because I believe they've been conflated, and we've seen tons of media stuff lately. But let's look at the evolution of a drill. It starts with hazard identification. What's the dangerous thing? And based on that, we are going to develop a safety strategy. Once we've done that, we're going to provide instruction on what to do to implement that safety strategy. We're going to ask to practice that, and then we're going to conduct a drill in order to create the muscle memory. And notice what I said there. It is in an exercise where we actually simulate an event in order to test capacity. And I believe that it is absolutely possible to have an ill-conceived exercise create trauma. But with a drill, we just simply want to create muscle memory. I'm going to give you two examples. You just saw I do a lot of flying, all right? And they provide me with instruction every flight on how to use the oxygen mask. They have yet to depressurize the plane at 35,000 feet to test my capacity to use it. When you do a fire drill, do you light the trash cans on fire in the hallway to do the drill? No. What we're doing is creating the muscle memory. It's been said there's no research on this. Well, there is research. In fact, it's specifically around the standard response protocol and the efficacy of drills. It's out of SUNY Oswego, State University of New York. None of this works without partnerships and relationships. We have had historically a strong relationship with the Colorado AG's office. I'm looking forward to renew that information with the new AG. Safe to tell, I've been in front of folks in this room talking about safe to tell. We've also had a tremendous relationship with the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence, and we're growing a relationship with the Colorado School Safety Resource Center. We've got curriculum usage and curriculum adoption with the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation. City and County of Denver, we're developing a municipal version of the SRP, and the Colorado School District Self-Insurance Pool. And I like the insurance pool because they haven't been on your radar, and yet they've hosted a number of trainings across the state. They weren't our first insurance pool. Our first one was in Oregon. Excuse me, Oregon was our second insurance pool. And Oregon's interesting. They legislated schools use lockout, lockdown, evacuate, and shelter. We work with the Indiana Department of Education. I'm going to talk more about them because their school safety academy model, I think, bears interest. Nebraska, it's a recommendation. Met with that director just a couple weeks ago. 80% of the schools in Nebraska are using our programs. It's a recommendation of Wyoming, Wisconsin, Vermont state recommendation, and then there's Texas. Our first insurance pool was the Texas Association of School Boards Risk Management Fund. But we also work with ALERT, Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training. They're the FBI recommended active shooter event for law enforcement. And we work with them, and we have since 2012, because that active shooter event is the first 5 minutes. What happens next? Perhaps it's a reunification. Texas School Safety Center has incorporated our materials into their online toolkits, and they bring foundation trainers into Texas on a frequent and regular basis. Here's the thing. What is the SRP? It isn't simply a safety protocol. It's a Trojan horse. You see, what we're doing is creating a common shared vocabulary. And in order to do that, we got to have a conversation in advance. And so it's been bringing law enforcement educators, administrators, and other first responders together to have that conversation. And that conversation doesn't need to focus on this, okay? But if you look at our world, lockdown, evacuate, reunification, often those are things that occur after the event. But we're seeing law enforcement, educators, administrators, we're hearing it today. Let's get ahead of the event. What is some of the training we can do? Are there drills that we can perform? The tip line, we've heard about Safe to Tell, but just as importantly, the support system, reporting system that includes that. Threat assessment and mitigation, can we make safer buildings? And through legislation, can we provide pressure to enforce some of these actions? But in order to perform the legislation, you must have standards, and in order to develop the standards, there has to be research. Here's the thing, you see this? It's actually all the same thing. It is one continuum, start to end. And where does that continuum start? It starts with research. Here's the thing. Research is telling us, you didn't want to talk about money. $30 million budget next year. You've already written the check. We just haven't dated it because there is research. This is out of Washington State Institute for Public Policy. And if you look at the slide, you'll see lots of green numbers, and then you'll also see some red numbers. Those red numbers are programs that don't work, that cost more than they benefit. But they also looked at programs that do work, that for every dollar spent, this dollar amount of benefit occurs. And that dollar amount of benefit is in social costs, in aftermath costs, and in incarceration costs, okay? Here's the deal. School to prison pipeline isn't SROs, folks. I'm gonna make you have a little heartburn. That school to prison pipeline is legislative priority, all right? You've already written the check. When are you gonna date it? If you do the math, we've got 920,000 students in the state of Colorado. If 0.1% end up incarcerated, in Colorado, that $30 million budget pales to $707 million cost of incarceration in Colorado at $38,000 an inmate. 0.1% overshadows your $30 million budget. When are you gonna write that check? Here's the thing, research tells us how, and we're already working on it. We're not waiting for you. We talked about the Colorado School Safety Center. We talked about the Center for the Study of Prevention of Violence. Well, we've been meeting together since the beginning of the year. Can we work collectively? Can we work in reinforcing our activities? Can we evaluate what we're doing? And we started. School Safety Center for the Study of Prevention of Violence, they're way on the front end. School Safety Center, they're on the front end and a bit on the back end. And we're kind of in the middle, all right? Here's the thing, who else is working on it in the state? We talked about Health Department, Communities That Care, Attorney General's office, Safe to Tell. But what isn't on your radar? I'll give you an example. Colorado School District Self-Insurance Pool. They are training, actually there's a training occurring today as we speak. 2 months ago, they trained 40 bus drivers on behavioral analysis. They've been doing training across the state. Colorado Uplift, who's heard of Colorado Uplift? Okay, I call these a local impact group. $5.2 million budget, and they are in our urban schools serving the communities that most need served. And here's what's cool about Colorado Uplift. In schools that typically have 68% graduation rates, students who go through their program, once in elementary school, once in middle school, and once in high school, have a 90+% graduation rate. In fact, almost 80% of them go to college, all right? That's a program that works, $5.2 million. That's 7% of your budget, and it is a private 501c3. There's another one, Friends First, okay? They've got a mentor program that increases positive behavior and decreases bullying. The mentees have significant gains in peer support and increases confidence avoiding harmful behavior. So what do we need? Absolutely need the research. Who's doing what? And we need the standards, okay? We promote an annual climate survey. You can't find and fix a problem if you don't know about it, but it needs to be standardized. And you've got some guidance. That Attorney General's document really is a roadmap, all right? But first you need to identify the landscape. And today, there is no coordination, there are no evaluation, no standards at the state level of who's doing what. Who's gonna wrangle it? maybe to answer that earlier question, we task and fund the School Safety Resource Center to get a picture on what is truly happening here on the state. But you can't just task them with it. You already wrote the check. We need to date it. We also need to get boots on the ground. And I'm going to wrap up with Indiana. Indiana has an interesting concept. It's called school safety specialists. And they've got legislation that mandates every school district, all 199 of them, have a school safety specialist. And in Indiana, the Department of Education is in charge of providing the training for the school safety specialists, basic, intermediate, and advanced. And the state funds that training. And not just that training, they fund travel and lodging, okay? They run it through the Indiana Department of Education, and again, it's a line item on the state budget. 199 school districts, and yet my last statewide training there were 800 people in the room and 500 live streaming it next door, okay, because the districts bring teams. We could do the same thing, but that isn't a Department of Education task in Colorado. Indiana doesn't have a school safety center. We've got a vibrant school safety center. But you guys need to look at it. When are you going to write that check? We can do it now, or we can pay more later. I'm going to wrap it up there.
Thank you.